just walk around in circles here. So next week we'll be back to normal. I'll be all over the place like I like to be. So what we're going to talk about today, again, we're going through the series called 7 Miles. And what that means is this. Okay, so on Easter Sunday, everybody kind of wakes up, and who's at the tomb? Who is waiting for Jesus to pop out of the tomb to celebrate the resurrection of Christ? Who's standing there waiting, going, nobody. Nobody. Not one single person, all right? The women come to the tomb, why? Are they coming to see the empty tomb? No, they're there to anoint the dead body, all right? And they get the message, and they run back and tell everybody, hey, he's not there. He's alive. The angels told us he's not here, that he is alive, all right? And, 2 of them run there, and they come back. But still, where are the rest of them? Where are the rest of all of these disciples that have been following Jesus all this time? On Easter Sunday morning, shouldn't they be at church, all right? Shouldn't they be ready? Shouldn't they be ready to go, all right? And even in the midst of all this, we get 2 guys. We know one of them's name is Cleopas. We don't know the other one's name. And they start heading back home. Why? They're done. They thought they would follow this Jesus guy, this Jesus of Nazareth. He was doing really cool stuff and saying really cool stuff. And they thought he was the Messiah, the one they've been waiting for 1,000 years, to come and redeem them and to set up this kingdom, and then they live happily ever after. And they woke up this day after Sabbath, said, let's just go home. And Jesus chases them down. And so this is what we've been walking through, and we'll walk one more week through this, is this conversation Jesus has with these 2 young men who have just given up and they're heading home. All right? And so we walk along with them, and I think Jesus comes upon them, and just because he's just this loving person that just says, I'm not letting this one get away. And I think there should be something within us that looks at our culture, looks at our world, and finds people and just says this, I'm not letting you get away. I'm not going to just sit by and watch you drift away from church, drift away from Christ, drift away from the fellowship. I think this is what Jesus meant when he told Peter, you are no longer going to fish for fish. You're going to be a fisher of men. And you will doggedly pursue people, and one after another. And so he chases these 2 guys down. And so he catches up with them, and he asks them, what? What are you guys talking about? What are you guys arguing about? What things are you throwing back and forth at each other? Literally, it's what he says. And they turned, and they stopped, and they looked gloomy. Their eyes, you could just see the sadness in their eyes, the devastation of what they thought it was going to be. And they said, we were hoping that he was about to redeem Israel. Now, here's my question. What did they know about redeeming Israel? When had Israel ever been redeemed? When had Israel ever been taken out of a place of captivity? All right? And when we say the word redeem in here, it's a Greek word lutroo, all right? Which literally is the word for ransom, all right? So think of ransom. You pay this ransom, you get somebody out of captivity. There's a price to be paid. There's a transaction there. And this was what they were saying. We were hoping he was going to be the one who would redeem or ransom Israel away from its oppressor. And so they make this argument, but when have they ever known being ransomed, being redeemed? You literally would have to go back 1,500 years in Israeli history to find a place where they were literally redeemed and ransomed out of a place of captivity. And that's what we want to talk about today. The Passover. They had just celebrated the Passover, right? I think they were a little nostalgic. We were hoping he was going to redeem Israel, and we were hoping he was going to do it on the Passover, just like it happened 1,500 years ago in Egypt. But it didn't. He just died. And we had our hopes up that this was going to be the moment he was going to. And I think Jesus going, wow, they completely missed it. They completely missed it. So he begins to explain. And it says he went from Moses all the way through the prophets, explaining and interpreting for them the Christ and why he had to suffer and what his whole ministry was all about. So let's jump into this today. I want to start in Genesis 15, though. Austin, you got that passage? I'm going to throw it up here. Genesis 15, in verse 13. All right, I want to put this on the table so that you understand that the whole enslavement of Israel was not a whoops, I wasn't looking, and all of a sudden the Egyptian Pharaoh came and took my people captive. All right, I want you to understand, this is a promise that was given to Abraham before he ever had kids. All right, so Abraham is probably about 85 years old. All right, and he is given this promise by God. All right, and this was an assurance. Now, he's been promised two things. What are the two things that God promised to Abraham? I will give you, remember, it's called the promised land. Good answer. All right, not only that, but he said, look up at the stars and count them. That's how many your what? Offspring will be. So these are the two promises that God gives to Abraham. So anytime you see in the scriptures the word the promise was given, or the promise, and from this till the promise, or from the promise until this, it's always talking about this promise. I will give you land, I will give you offspring. How are they doing with that promise, by the way? Like currently, today, are there any Jewish people left in the world? A few, all right. Where do they live? Who lives in the land that was given in this promise? The Jewish people do now, all right? This promise is still on the table. The promise is still good, all right? And so he makes this promise of land and offspring, but then he says, let me give you an assurance. I'm going to give you a sign, give you something so you know this is true. So you know this wasn't an accident. I'm in control of this. So look at the text. It says this, all right? Then the Lord said to Abraham, know this for certain. Write it down. Mark it down. This will happen. Your offspring will be foreigners in a land that does not belong to them. All right? Anybody ever been there before? You ever been a stranger in the land, a foreigner in the land? All right? Holland did her little thing in England until the plague hit. All right? And we had to bring her home. But she was a foreigner in her land. All right? She was not like them. All right? They ate weird stuff. They talked weird. They did all that stuff, all right? She was a foreigner in the land, all right? And then keep going with this. They will be enslaved and oppressed 4 years. Okay, now, I'm not going to let me just blow your mind for just a second. For those of you that are still hanging on to the VBS version of the story, they were not enslaved for 400 years. Is everybody okay with that? Nobody passed out, I'm hoping, okay? My estimate is more like they were enslaved for 100 years. But were they strangers in the land? Yes. They were strangers, and they would become enslaved in the land, and that period of time would be 400 years, okay? Now, I can do the math for you. Let's keep going with the text because I don't want to get bogged down, all right? However, verse 14, however, I will judge the nation they serve, all right? Think plague, all right? Everybody got with me? The 10 plagues, okay? And afterward, they will go out with many possessions. And I love this part of the story. The part of the story that says, hey, we're leaving. Hey, they go to your neighbor and go, hey, can I have all your jewelry? And they will say, sure, take it, go away. And you're going to plunder this land with many possessions. Verse 15, but you, who's you in this sentence? Who's God talking to? Come on, think, not just listen, all right? Who's he talking to? But you, Abraham, all right? You will go to your fathers in peace and be buried at a ripe old age. In verse 16, it says this is really cool. In the 4th generation, they, your offspring, will return here, for the iniquity of the Amorites has not yet reached its full measure. All right? Now, so how does the story go? Abraham lives where? As a stranger in the land. Isaac, his son, grows up where? As a stranger in the land. All right? Decide they want to do what with little baby brother? Come on, this is a story part. You can play along with me. What do they want to do with baby brother that really gets on their nerves? Because baby brother gets everything, right? Some of you have that little brother that you're like, See, I was that little brother, all right? I have an older brother. He would have sold me in a heartbeat, all right? So what did they do with him? They sell him into slavery, into what land? Into Egypt. In this, later on, this brother is going to say what? what you meant for evil, God meant for good, to save our family. So why did they go to Egypt? Were they enslaved? Did the Egyptians come and capture them and take them off to Egypt? No, they walked in themselves gladly. Lived in the best part of the land in Goshen. All right? Joseph lived probably another 70 years after they came to Egypt. And Joseph was still what? Second in command. Held a high position. And so in all this time, think how much time would just elapsed between the promise given, the rest of the life of Abraham, the life of Isaac, the life of Jacob, and the life of Joseph. We're at about 270 years. And are they enslaved yet? Are they? No. In fact, what? They are living in a prominent position. That's Joseph's people. They live there. Leave them alone. We like them. All right? So we have this promise that sits on the table. So, and again, I want to tell you this because I don't want you to think that God kind of messed up or God slipped up and God lost control of this. No, God has his hands on this the whole time. And in the fourth generation, he says, I'm going to bring you back, which is really cool because Jacob has a son named Levi, who has a son named Kohath, who has a son named Amram, who has a son named Moses. God is in complete control of this situation. All right? Absolute, complete control. No loss whatsoever. Now, when you go to Exodus, and you start looking at Exodus, you go to Exodus 1, we have Jacob and the family, all right? And they come on over here, and you can follow me along here in Exodus 1, all right? Exodus 1, Jacob and the family come. 70 people start, which is really cool because 70 people show up in Egypt, and about... let me do the math here real quick. Probably about 150, maybe 200 years later, 2 million descendants walk out. You with me? Abraham, look up at the stars. How many descendants can you count? At the time, how many did he have? None. They go to Egypt, and how many walk out in the Exodus? 600,000 fighting men. I'm guessing about 2 million, all right? So they go there. Now, here's the crucial point. Verse 8. Everybody look in verse 8. You see it? A new king who had not known Joseph came to power in Egypt. Now, what we know from history is there was a new dynasty that came into power about 100 years before the Exodus, which is exactly the right time frame for this new king to have come to power, all right? Joseph dies off, all right? In about 1550, we have, I wrote it down, the new kingdom, all right? That's a really fancy term in this, the new kingdom. This dynasty comes into power in 1550, and he didn't know Joseph. How could you not know Joseph? I mean, Joseph was his story. He was huge. He's the guy that saved everybody because he understood the dream, and he'd set aside all the food, and it saved the whole land. Everybody knew Joseph, all right? Egyptians were pretty good at history, right? Did they just write it down somewhere or just talk about it? No, what did Egyptians do to commemorate history? The hieroglyphics are everywhere. They drew pictures of it and went, oh, that was the picture of that. They knew him. But this new king comes to power. And what does he do? He says, I don't like these people over here. I don't know who they are or who they think they are, but there are too many of them. And they could turn against us. So he does what? He begins to enslave and oppress them. Who saw that coming? All right? Remember, the Israelites were strangers in the land, and they would be enslaved and oppressed. For how long of a period of time? 400 years. So we're at about the 300 mark when this new king comes to power. Now, he goes to the midwives, and he tells the midwives, the Egyptian midwives, hey, when you're helping the Israelites give birth to the babies, what do you do with the boys? Kill them. Just kill them. Kill them. I mean, babies, it's not hard to kill them, okay? All right? So kill them. But the midwife said, we fear God too much. We are not going to do that. And they made up this story of, the Israelite women, they're really tough. They just shoot those things right out and they're gone. It's too late. We can't get to them to kill them because they have birth so quickly. All right? Pharaoh goes, can't believe that happened. But now the new rule is what? Throw them into the Nile. Drown them. Moses. Now, there was a baby. Yosheved had a baby 3 years earlier, a son, whose name was Aaron, right? Yeah, with me? Was Aaron thrown in the Nile? Was he killed? What happened to him? Could it be that there's a period of time in between these 3 years where these edicts came down from this new king? And really, this policy started only 80 years before the Exodus would have taken place. All right? That's why you want to read Scripture very, very carefully and parse sentences and think through things. All right? So Moses is born. He's placed in the reeds. He's not floated down the Nile, and crocodiles and hippopotamuses are not trying to eat him along the way. All right? It's like literally, hey, let's put him here in the bushes and let the lady come along and find him. All right? So we know the story of Moses. Moses is saved. He's taken into the palace eventually, and about the age of 40, he starts to venture out and go, these are my people. Well, we know he gets into a little, I killed that guy, and that guy accused me of killing him, and then Pharaoh tries to kill me, and boom, Moses is gone. I'm out, done. So at about 40 years of age, he runs off to Midian, all right? Now, we pick up in chapter 3. Moses is out, and he's about 80 years old now, and he's watching this bush. This bush is on fire, and he keeps waiting for it to burn out, and it keeps burning. He's like, that's really cool. I think I'm going to go look at that thing, all right? He walks up to the bush, and all of a sudden the voice is, take off your sandals, you're on holy ground. Well, that was new, all right? This was a new moment. So he takes off his shoes, and God Almighty speaks to him and says, go back and get my people. I've heard their cries. I have heard what has happened to them, and I am sending you to go retrieve them. And of course, Moses says, all right, I'll go. No, what does he say? What does Moses do in this moment? He's been hand-selected. I mean, could there be anyone more qualified than Moses in this moment? Does he speak the language? Does he know the palace? Does he know the people? I'd always thought earlier, how in the world does Moses, random Jewish guy, get to go walk into Pharaoh's palace and ask him, let my people go? It's because he knew the way. He knew the people. He was brought right in there. But he says what? I can't. I won't. I don't talk so good. And God goes, dadgummit, just get in the car and go, all right? So he finally sends him off. Moses says, okay, all right, I'll go. But Aaron has to talk for me. This whole negotiation goes on. And he's on his way out the door, and what does God say to him in chapter 4? Oh, by the way, when you say, let my people go, I'm going to harden his heart so he won't let you go. He does this to Isaiah. Remember Isaiah? I was in the temple. I saw the Lord seated on his throne, high and lifted up, and I saw the robe of his temple filling the temple. And God looked around and says, who will go? And I said, here I am, send me. And he goes, okay, I'm going to send you. He's going to drive them until this last plague, which is the Passover. All right? So look here in 4. Look in chapter 4, verse 21. Verse 4:21 says, the Lord instructed Moses, when you go back to Egypt, make sure you do all the wonders before Pharaoh that I have put in your power. But I will harden his heart so that he won't let the people go. Okay, so here's the plan. Go tell Pharaoh, let my people go. And I'm going to convince him to let your people go. And then you're going to harden his heart so he won't let the people go. We got that right? How you feeling if you're Moses at this point? Really? Is this really the plan? Okay, all right. But what's he driving them to? He says, I'm going to drive them to something. Then you will say to Pharaoh, this is what Yahweh says, Israel is my firstborn son. I told you, let my son go so that he may worship me. But you refuse to let him go. Now I will kill your firstborn son. So what's he going to do? He's going to get him right to the point where he says, all right, go. And then all of a sudden God's going to go, no, you're not going to let him go. so I'm going to throw another plague on you. No, you're not going to let them go. And what do? We go through the plagues, and what do we get? All right. Moses goes in there and throws the snake down, right? All right. Actually, Aaron throws the snake down. That's the whole part of the story that we miss, all right? And then we turn the Nile to blood, all right? Would that be somewhat devastating? All right? Imagine your whole entire civilization culture is based around this river, and now it's blood, all right? Eggs. The second one would have knocked me out. Y'all know this. I hate frogs. We had a frog on our back porch last night. Holland went outside. I thought that child better not pick that frog up and bring it into my house, or she will be cut off forever and ever, all right? I said, y'all, the Israelites would be worshiping frogs right now if I'd been Pharaoh, because I would have let you go if you'd just shown me a frog. I'm like, go. The Lord can't even harden my heart on this one. Frogs, I'm done, okay? But after the frogs leave, we get the gnats, we get flies, we get the livestock, like cow tipping, but just without the tipping part. They just start dying everywhere, all right? And then the boils start. That may knock some of you guys out. You're like, ugh, boils? I'm good. I'm out, all right? After that, what do we get after that? We get hail. Hail with lightning inside of it. Do the math on that one. That's a little scary. Hail just hitting and killing anything and everything. And whatever did not die because of the hail, God sent the locust plague to eat up everything left. And then he said, okay, I got all the gods of this civilization knocked out. There's one left. The sun god was the only one left standing. And everybody thought, well, no one can touch the sun god, right? Let's have darkness for 3 days. Now, who's in charge? And God was driving them to this, because every time he would send the plague, Pharaoh would say, okay, I'll let you go, and God will go, no, you won't. It's almost like he's propping him up, just holding him up. All right, I'll let you stand up again, almost like a boxer that just wants to pummel a guy for 10 rounds. Now, I'll hit you to your point about you're about to knock out, and I'll let you stand up. I'll let you catch your breath, and I'll bam. In chapter 10, it says this, right before the locusts. Then the Lord said to Moses, go to Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart and the heart of his officials, so that I may do these miraculous signs of mine among them. And so that, watch this, so that you may tell your sons and grandson how severely I dealt with the Egyptians. Why is he doing this? To create a legacy, to create a story, so that you could go and you could tell the story of how awesome, majestic, powerful your God is. So I've told this so you could tell your son, your grandson, how severely I dealt with the Egyptians and performed miraculous signs among them. And you will know that I am Yahweh. I'm not doing it just for them. I'm not doing it just to scare them. I'm doing it to scare you. I'm doing this work so that you will understand, know, and fear me, which is completely lacking in our churches today. We walk into buildings. We get our happy, clappy, nice little message. We're told to be really nice to everybody else, and we go out, and we have absolutely no fear of God in our lives. There is no moment where we stop and go, I'm not going there. I'm not saying that. I'm not going to do that because I fear God too much to violate his covenant. I'm not doing that. And up to that point, you are absolutely useless. Chapter 11. This is when it starts to kick in. Why? Because why is he driving them to this point? He wants to get to Passover. Why? Because there's a foreshadowing in the Passover that we need to see. And this is what you see throughout Genesis, throughout all the foreshadowing stories. What's the storyline here? We have sin, which brings about peril, all right? From which we need to be what? If you're drowning in a pool, you need a what? You need a lifeguard like Holland, and she will save you, all right? So there is peril, which brings about substitution and sacrifice. Something's got to die. It happens every story. Something has to die to save you from the peril that you're in. And that something dying and sacrificing brings about an atoning work which rescues you from the peril you were in, which leads you directly into freedom, because now you are no longer in peril. You are no longer enslaved. You have been ransomed. You have been rescued by that substitution sacrifice. And this story plays out over and over and over and over. We can keep going with this. We'll keep going. Man, next week is awesome. Do not miss next week. You need to understand next week's story. But we even see it in something as simple as Ruth and Boaz. Boaz comes in and redeems Ruth. When he didn't have to, it cost him some last judgment. I'm going to send, all right? And I'm going to take out the firstborn male of every single person in Egypt. Every single one. Go tell Pharaoh. Not go warn him to get him to do something. No, just go tell him. Moses doesn't ask for anything. He just says, I came here to let you know this is going to happen. And when it does, you will let us go. In 12, we get the instructions. Let's start reading a little bit in 12. Y'all with me? The Lord said to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, this month is to be the beginning of months for you. It is the first month of your year. Tell the whole community of Israel that on the 10th day of this month, they must each select an animal of the flock according to their father's households, one animal per household. If the household is too small for a whole animal, that person and the neighbor nearest his house are to select one based on the combined number of people. You should apportion the animal according to what each person will eat. You must have an unblemished animal, a year-old male. You may take it from either the sheep or the goats. You're to keep it until the 14th day. Now, I've always asked the question, if you were in charge and you were the firstborn son, all right, Connor, how carefully would you go select the unblemished animal that's going to protect you? Would you spend a little time out there, or would you just go, that one's good enough? All right, Cole, what do you think? All right, would you spend a little time? If you sent Jack out to do this, how would that work out for you? You would be toast, all right? Jack would be out there, yeah, that's good enough for Cole. Depended on this. Mark, you with me over there? Yeah, you ain't sending Zach, are you? Heck no, All right? So you're looking for this. And what you got to understand is the value of this animal, this lamb or goat, in the original story. I think sometimes it gets lost. The pastor, we just throw a lamb on the grill and we'll cook it up and we'll eat and all that stuff. What was the value of the lamb in the original story? Because you would slaughter this one on the 14th day. Now, this whole time, I'm wondering if the Emmaus boys are going, 10th day, isn't that when Jesus rode into town and we selected the lamb? 14th day, I think that was about the exact time Jesus was being crucified. Wait a second. The lamb selected, the lamb slaughtered. Jesus was the lamb. And I'm wondering if the wheels are starting to turn and they're going, all right, I can't believe, because what happens to their face? Their face goes from gloomy-eyed to what happens to their heart? Their heart becomes ablaze within them. Oh my goodness, we missed it. How do we not see Jesus was the Passover lamb? He was selected on the 10th day. He was slaughtered on the 14th day. And his blood, what did they do with it 1,500 years earlier? They painted the doorframe. Look at this text. I want you to see this. In verse 13, jump down to this, distinguishing mark. It does not say your church attendance will be the distinguishing mark for you. I've been up there in heaven counting every time you walk into that building. And if you get a certain number, you're in. That will be a distinguishing mark. I've been a member of this church for 48,000 years. Who cares? You haven't done a thing since you've been here all this time. All you've done is take up coffee, donuts, and sit around and do nothing, not one bit of fruit. Who cares? Oh, the law. You follow the law. You follow the rules, and that will be the distinguishing mark. How's anybody doing with that? Because unless you've got a perfect 100 score on your little law sheet, you're out. Oh, but thank God the Lamb was selected. And the blood covered the door frame. And God said the blood will be the distinguishing mark. It's not about your works. It's not about your geography. It's about, do you have the blood of the Lamb on you? That's the only thing that matters. There is absolutely not one other standard if you're going to be saved. The blood creates the distinguishing mark. And when I see the blood, I will pass over. Keep going in the text. Later on in this, in verse 22, it says, take a cluster of hyssop, dip it in the blood that is in the basin, and brush the lintel of the 2 doorposts with some of the blood in the basin. None of you may go out of the door of his house until morning. Or else what? This is kind of like the Noah story. You see, and at the time we talked about this, we said you can believe in God. There's a lot of people who believe in God, who stand completely outside of salvation. They believe in God. I believe there's a God. I believe he tells us to be nice. I believe he tells those people to walk into buildings. I believe in God. I just don't want to believe into God. I want to stand back and be spiritual. I want to stand back and be a really nice person and believe in God. And I'm saying this, that's not where salvation is found. It wasn't found for Noah and his family. It was found when he walked into the ark. Because you don't get credit for what you believe outside of it. You see, Noah and his family had to go into the ark. And what did they do when they got into the ark to save themselves? Nothing. And that's how salvation works. You don't do anything. You are utterly incapable of doing anything to add to your salvation. You simply sit in it and go, thank you. Thank you. Can you imagine midnight and you're sitting in your house and you got the blood painted on the door and we said, we believe in God and we're believing into God and I ain't leaving this house. And they sat there and all of a sudden they started to hear the cry. This is redemption. This is the ransom. Pharaoh called him and said, get out. Get out, get out, get out. I'm done. Get out. We're out. And they marched out that night. That night, they marched out because God says, it's done. The penalty has been paid. The lamb has been killed. Now you get freedom. The atonement has been made. The blood has been shed, and that blood created a distinguishing mark. Now you can walk out. Now you have been rescued. To walk out into what? You know, I think it's kind of funny. God tells him, hey, when you sit down to eat this meal, dress for travel. Think about that one for a second. When you tell someone who's been a slave for 80 years, dress for travel. What does that look like? They had no idea. They had no idea. Can you imagine after 80 years, maybe 100 years of slavery, these people are told, get out. And they walk out that night completely free. Absolutely free. Completely ransomed by the blood of the Lamb. And that cross is all the only thing that has saved you. It's the only distinguishing mark that saves you. And what did you do to deserve it? What did you do to earn it? Nothing. It was given because God loves you. Remember, God loved the world in this way. God so loved the world that he gave his son. Now, Paul picks up on this. Let me finish with this. He goes to 1 Corinthians He writes to the Corinthians, and they've got an issue with some garbage in the church. And he goes, guys, don't you understand? Christ is our Passover lamb that has been sacrificed for us. And so what happens after the Passover? They walk out in freedom. But the rule was you walk out in freedom, but you're going to walk right into the feast of unleavened bread. So you're going to eat unleavened bread. Think saltines, all right? You with me? Not those little barely crumb things that you get at Lord's Supper sometimes, all right? Never understood that. I'm like, give me more than that. Come on now, all right? That's what we're thinking. Go, and you're going to live in this. He says, so as you go out, Christ is our Passover lamb, Corinthians. Don't you understand? He's the one that died in our place. He's the lamb whose blood was on the door. He's the one that saved us. Now we go out in freedom. Absolute freedom. And he says to the Corinthians, he says, therefore, let us observe the feast. Let's get out. Let's live in freedom. The problem is no kidding. I know I'm sinful, but I've been saved. And I live in freedom, and I live in worship. And I take this unleavened bread, and Paul paints such a beautiful picture. He says, let's go observe the feast in freedom. I was driving me crazy this morning. I had this scene in my head. I'm a movie scene person. Movies just stick with me forever and ever and ever. So I was sitting there thinking through this scene of let's observe the feast. Let's celebrate the thing. And I had this image. There was a scene in a movie, and it was, I couldn't remember if it was like a prisoner of war camp or something. It was just a total destitute, horrible situation. And all of a sudden, this little guy comes out of nowhere with this little cake thing. And to his friend, he goes, we got to celebrate because it's your birthday. And I mean, in the midst of all this tragedy all around them, he's going, but we need to celebrate because it's your birthday. And I figured it out, actually. It's Alive. If y'all ever seen the movie Alive, when the rugby team crashes in the Andes Mountains and they're stuck there for like 10 weeks. I forget how long it is. It's this scene. And in the midst of all this tragedy, this one guy, Carlitos, keeps going to everybody on their birthday and makes a snowball with a cigarette in it. And he goes, we've got to celebrate. It's your birthday. And they're looking around and they're like eating people. And there's like, they're on the top of the Andes Mountains, snow everywhere. No one's coming to find them. And in the midst of all of day. And so they bring him a snowball with a cigarette in it. And it's like, yay. And later on, he's sitting out on the middle of nowhere in the Andes Mountains. And he's just smiling and looking around. And the guys come up to him and go, oh no, whose birthday is it today? He says, it's my father's birthday. And they bring him another snowball with a cigarette in it. Because why? Because we've got to observe the feast. We've got to celebrate the resurrection of Christ. We've got to celebrate the fact that his blood is the distinguishing mark in my life. And we've got to stop just waking up every day, brushing our teeth, going to work, going to school, coming home, doing dinner, having the same discussions, having the same arguments, going to bed, getting up the next day, and doing the same thing over and over and over and over and over again if we're ever going to change this world. It's time to celebrate the feast. And some of you need to find this. You need to understand you have been saved. So walk into your freedom. Your life can be new. Paul says, don't celebrate with the old yeast. Don't celebrate with the yeast of malice and evil. Celebrate with the new yeast of sincerity and truth. I have no desire for this church to be what it was like in the first week of March. And I'll say that even feast. I want us to see the Passover and how it can transform our lives. Can you imagine these slaves walking out of Egypt? What have they known all their lives? What has the normal been? You wake up, you make bricks. You wake up, you make bricks. You wake up, you make bricks. You get beaten. You wake up, you make bricks. You wake up, you make bricks. For 80 years, for all of their lives, that's all they knew. But now, on this day, they walked out into freedom. And everything changed. my question is, what's changed in you? What is going to change in you? What's the new normal like for you? But even more, see this voice? By dinner time, it's all going to change for them. Right? Where were they heading? Heading home. We were done. We thought we were doing this. And now, look at what opened up in their lives. Nothing would ever, ever, ever be the same. Is that your story? Will that be your story from this moment on? Let's pray. Father, I pray that you would save us from what we were. I pray that you would save the church from what it was. Father, I pray that we would be so enraptured by the beauty of this Passover, of this mindset that we are free from all this, and that it would just unleash worship in our lives. That our thoughts would change, our words would change, our actions would change, that everything we do would be in pursuit of knowing you, glorifying you, teaching you to others, so that they can understand the joy that we have because we know what you have done for us. Father, make us different people. Drive us out of the old way. Drive us out of the old way of life that said we've got to do this, and just drive us into the freedom that we can find in your Son, Jesus Christ, our Passover.